I watched my sister Victoria roll her eyes as she introduced me to her real estate clients at the upscale Meridian Country Club. "This is my younger sister Camila," she said with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. She's still trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. What Victoria didn't know was that the woman she'd been dismissing as a directionless failure for the past 5 years was about to meet someone who would shatter every assumption she'd built about me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in the corner of the private dining room watching Victoria command the attention of Riverside's most prominent property developers. She had a gift for making herself the center of any conversation while simultaneously making me invisible. It was a skill she'd perfected since we were teenagers, and one that had served her well in building her reputation as the city's premier luxury real estate agent. Camila's been bouncing between different things. Victoria continued, her voice carrying that tone of sisterly concern that fooled everyone except me. Art classes, some online courses, a little freelance work here and there, nothing substantial yet, but we all mature at our own pace, right? The clients nodded politely, their eyes briefly flickering toward me before returning to Victoria's animated gestures as she described her latest $1 million listing. I took a sip of my water and said nothing. I learned years ago that correcting Victoria's narrative only gave her more ammunition to paint me as defensive or delusional. What these distinguished business leaders didn't know was that the woman Victoria described as unemployed and directionless had just closed a consulting contract worth more than Victoria's entire annual commission. They didn't know that while Victoria was showing McMansions to tech executives, I was designing the digital infrastructure that powered half the Fortune 500 companies in the region. Victoria had always been the golden child. Valedictorian at Westfield Academy, full scholarship to Pemberton University, youngest agent ever to join the elite Blackstone Realty Group. Our parents had framed every one of her achievements, from her first sales award to her recent feature in Metropolitan Business Magazine as Rising Star Under 30. Meanwhile, I'd chosen a different path. After graduating from State University with a computer science degree, I'd turned down corporate job offers to start my own cybersecurity consulting firm. Victoria saw this as proof of my inability to commit to anything serious. Our parents, influenced by Victoria's constant commentary, began to worry I was wasting my potential. She could have worked for any tech company in Denver. Instead, she's working out of her apartment, doing odd jobs for small businesses. I keep telling her she needs stability, benefits, a real career track. The truth was more complex than Victoria cared to understand. My odd jobs included securing the networks of 3 major banks, designing privacy protocols for a telecommunications giant, and developing ransomware protection systems that were quietly deployed across multiple government agencies. But since I worked under non-disclosure agreements and couldn't discuss my clients publicly, Victoria filled the silence with her own assumptions. She assumed my modest apartment meant I was struggling financially. She assumed my casual clothes meant I wasn't professional. She assumed my reluctance to discuss work meant there wasn't much to discuss. Each assumption built upon the last until she'd constructed an entire narrative about my failure to launch. At family gatherings, Victoria's success stories dominated every conversation. Our parents would beam with pride as she described her latest 6-figure sale or her invitation to exclusive industry events. When attention occasionally turned to me, the questions were always gentle and concerned, as if I were recovering from some chronic illness. "How's the computer work going, dear?" my mother would ask, her voice carrying the same tone people use when asking about physical therapy progress. "Any luck finding something more permanent?" my father would add, glancing at Victoria for approval of his careful phrasing. I learned to give vague, positive answers that satisfied their need to worry about me without providing details they wouldn't understand anyway. It's going well, staying busy, building relationships with clients. This seemed to comfort them while confirming Victoria's assessment that I was still figuring things out. The pattern had been consistent for years.
Victoria would subtly undermine my credibility in public while expressing private concern about my direction. She'd offered to help me network, suggest I apply to the marketing firm where her boyfriend worked, or recommend I consider going back to school for an MBA. Each offer came wrapped in genuine-sounding sisterly love, but underneath was the clear message that my current path was insufficient. What made it particularly frustrating was that Victoria wasn't malicious. She genuinely believed she was helping by pushing me toward more conventional success. In her world, achievement meant visible symbols, corner offices, company cars, public recognition, and clear hierarchies. My work existed in the shadows, protecting systems most people didn't know needed protection, solving problems that never became headlines because prevention doesn't make news. Tonight's dinner at Meridian was supposed to be a celebration of Victoria's latest triumph, landing the exclusive listing for the new Riverside Heights development, a luxury residential project that would cement her status as the region's top-tier real estate agent. She had invited me because our mother had insisted, not because she particularly wanted me there. As I watched her work the room, I had to admire her skill. Victoria had built genuine expertise in her field. She understood market trends, could read clients' psychological motivations, and had an encyclopedic knowledge of every property in the metropolitan area. Her success wasn't undeserved, which made her dismissal of my different approach all the more complicated. The evening was following its predictable script. Victoria would hold court, sharing industry insights and charming anecdotes. The clients would be impressed by her knowledge and confidence. I would remain quietly in the background, occasionally nodding when someone made polite conversation, but mostly invisible. Everyone would leave convinced that Victoria was destined for even greater success, while feeling vaguely sorry for her struggling younger sister. But tonight would be different. Tonight, the carefully constructed narrative Victoria had built about our respective positions in the world was about to encounter an inconvenient truth. And the person who would deliver that truth was someone I'd been hoping to avoid running into in such a public setting. As I glanced around the elegant dining room, taking in the crystal chandeliers and mahogany paneling that spoke to old money and established power, I had no idea that in less than an hour, Victoria's entire understanding of who I was and what I'd accomplished would be turned completely upside down. The stage was set for a revelation that would change everything between us, delivered by the one person whose opinion Victoria valued above almost anyone else's in the business world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria had perfected the art of constructing stories about people's lives, especially mine. It wasn't malicious, exactly, but it was thorough. Over the past 5 years, she'd built an entire mythology around my supposed failure to thrive, complete with supporting evidence she'd carefully curated and selective memory that reinforced her conclusions. The narrative began during my senior year at State University. While Victoria was graduating summa cum laude from Pemberton's prestigious business program and fielding job offers from top firms, I was turning down interviews with tech giants like Zenith Corp and Dataflow Industries. To our parents, this looked like self-sabotage. To Victoria, it was proof that I lacked ambition and practical judgment. She's afraid of real responsibility, Victoria had confided to our mother during one of their weekly phone calls, unaware that I was within earshot. These companies were offering her 6-figure starting salaries, full benefits, clear advancement paths. But she wants to work for herself because she can't handle having a boss. Our mother, Patricia, absorbed this interpretation without question. Victoria had always been the more social daughter, the one who called regularly and shared details about her life. When I chose privacy over transparency, the vacuum I left was filled by Victoria's confident assessments of my psychological motivations. The narrative gained momentum when I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Millbrook, a modest neighborhood near the University District. Victoria lived in a luxury high-rise in downtown Riverside, complete with a doorman and city views. The contrast became another data point in her narrative about our divergent trajectories. She keeps telling her she could afford something nicer if she'd just commit to steady employment, Victoria would say when giving people directions to family gatherings. But she's chosen this bohemian lifestyle where she prioritizes creative freedom over financial stability. The word creative always carried a slight inflection in Victoria's voice, as if she were describing a charming but impractical hobby. She'd categorized my work as some form of artistic expression, despite never asking what I actually did with computers. In her mind, anything that didn't follow traditional corporate structures must be inherently less serious. Victoria's version of events became the family's official history. At Thanksgiving dinners and birthday celebrations, relatives would approach me with expressions of gentle concern, having been briefed on my ongoing transition period. Great Aunt Eleanor would pat my hand and remind me that everyone blooms in their own time. Cousin Janet would share stories of friends who'd found stability after years of experimenting with different paths. The most insidious part of Victoria's narrative was how she wove in just enough truth to make it believable. I did work from home. I did dress casually for most of my day-to-day activities. I did maintain irregular hours, sometimes working late into the night or starting projects on weekends. These observable facts became evidence for conclusions that were entirely wrong. She stays up all night on her computer, Victoria would report to our parents after visiting my apartment. I think she's gotten addicted to social media or gaming or something. When I suggested she might want to establish better work-life boundaries, she got defensive and changed the subject. What Victoria hadn't understood during that visit was that I was in the middle of addressing a critical security breach for Meridian Financial Group, one of the region's largest banking institutions. The defensive response she interpreted as avoidance was actually my inability to discuss confidential client information, even with family members. Victoria's storytelling extended beyond our immediate family. At professional networking events, she'd mention her sister who was still exploring her options in the tech space. At dinner parties, she'd share concerns about young people who graduate from college but struggle to launch their careers. I became her case study of millennial directionlessness, a cautionary tale wrapped in sisterly affection. The narrative became self-reinforcing as people responded to Victoria's framing with their own similar stories. Everyone seemed to know someone who graduated with a computer science degree, but couldn't find their footing in the corporate world. My situation fit a familiar template of educated young adults who were somehow unprepared for professional reality. "It's not uncommon," Dr. Harrison had assured our mother during a routine appointment. "This generation expects work to be fulfilling and meaningful. They haven't learned that sometimes you have to pay your dues in jobs that aren't perfect before you find your passion." Our mother had repeated this conversation to Victoria, who'd nodded knowingly. It confirmed what she'd suspected all along. I was suffering from unrealistic expectations about work and life. The solution, in Victoria's mind, was for me to accept that compromise and practicality were necessary steps toward adult responsibility. Victoria's concern wasn't entirely fabricated. She genuinely worried about my long-term financial security and social isolation. From her perspective, I was making choices that would limit my options and leave me vulnerable as I aged. Her attempts to help felt urgent because she believed I was wasting precious years that couldn't be recovered. I don't want her to wake up at 35 and realize she has no savings, no career advancement, no professional network, Victoria had explained to her boyfriend, Michael, during a conversation I'd overheard at a family barbecue. Right now it feels like freedom, but it's really just delayed consequences. The irony was that Victoria's assessment contained fragments of legitimate insight about career development and financial planning, which made her conclusions about my specific situation seem more credible. She understood the importance of building professional credentials, establishing industry connections, and creating long-term financial stability. Her advice would have been valuable for someone who actually was struggling to find direction. Victoria had also constructed explanations for why I didn't correct her assumptions more directly. In her analysis,
My reluctance to discuss work details was evidence of embarrassment about my lack of progress. My casual responses to her career suggestions indicated that I was in denial about my situation. My preference for changing the subject when family members asked about my professional life proved that I knew, deep down, that I was falling behind my peers. Quote, "She gets uncomfortable when people ask direct questions about her income or her 5-year plan," Victoria had observed to our cousin Rachel during a holiday gathering. "I think she knows she's not where she should be at this stage of life, but she's not ready to admit it yet." This interpretation allowed Victoria to maintain her role as the caring but realistic sister who saw past my defense mechanisms to the underlying truth. It positioned her as someone with superior insight into my psychological state, someone who could see problems I was too proud or scared to acknowledge myself. The narrative gained additional credibility because Victoria could point to concrete evidence of her own success. Her income was publicly visible through real estate transactions reported in local business journals. Her professional achievements were documented through awards and media coverage. Her social status was confirmed by invitations to exclusive events and associations with prominent community members. By contrast, my professional accomplishments were invisible to outside observers. The companies I worked with were bound by confidentiality agreements that prevented them from publicly acknowledging my contributions. The problems I solved were by definition prevented rather than celebrated. The systems I secured operated quietly in the background, noticed only when they failed. Victoria's version of our comparative success was reinforced every time someone congratulated her on a major sale or asked for her opinion on market trends. Meanwhile, no one ever approached me at social gatherings to discuss my latest project or seek my professional advice. The asymmetry made her interpretation of our relative positions seem obvious and unassailable. She'd created a comprehensive framework for understanding my choices that explained every behavior that might otherwise contradict her conclusions. If I seemed confident or content, it was because I was living in denial. If I appeared stressed or busy, it proved I was struggling with unstable work arrangements. If I avoided discussing specifics, it confirmed that there weren't impressive details to share. The story Victoria told about me had become so integrated into our family's understanding of both our personalities that questioning it would require dismantling years of accumulated assumptions. She wasn't just reporting on my career status, she was maintaining an entire ecosystem of beliefs about ambition, responsibility, success, and the different paths people take through early adulthood. What made the situation particularly complex was that Victoria's narrative served important psychological functions for everyone involved. It allowed our parents to worry productively about one daughter while celebrating the clear success of the other. It gave extended family members a framework for understanding why some young adults struggle with career development. It positioned Victoria as someone with wisdom and insight about professional development. Most importantly, it confirmed Victoria's belief that her own choices had been correct and that her success was earned rather than fortunate. By contrast with my apparent struggles, her achievements looked even more impressive and her approach to career building seemed obviously superior. The foundation was now fully laid for what would happen when this carefully constructed narrative encountered an inconvenient truth that couldn't be explained away or reframed to fit the existing story. While Victoria was building her reputation selling luxury properties to Riverside's elite, I was quietly securing the digital infrastructure that kept their businesses operational. The contrast between perception and reality had become so stark that sometimes I wondered if I was living two completely different lives. My company, Quantum Shield Security, operated from a converted warehouse space in the industrial district of Thornfield, about 20 minutes from my Millbrook apartment. The building looked unremarkable from the outside: gray concrete walls, minimal signage, and a parking lot that rarely appeared full. Inside, however, was a sophisticated operation that most people in Riverside would never have imagined existed in their city. The main floor housed a state-of-the-art security operations center where my team of 12 specialists monitored networks across 3 time zones. Banks, hospitals, manufacturing plants, and government facilities depended on our systems to detect and neutralize cyber threats before they could cause damage. The work was invisible by design. Successful cybersecurity meant nothing dramatic ever happened.
My client roster read like a directory of regional powerhouses. Westbridge Medical Center, the largest hospital system in 3 counties, relied on our protocols to protect patient data and ensure their surgical robotic systems couldn't be compromised. Titanium Manufacturing, which produced components for aerospace and defense contractors, trusted us to safeguard their proprietary designs from industrial espionage. Most significantly, I held the primary security contract for the Riverside Regional Banking Consortium, a network of 17 financial institutions that processed billions in transactions monthly. When the consortium's previous security provider suffered a massive data breach 2 years ago, they'd quietly hired Quantum Shield to rebuild their entire digital defense architecture from the ground up. The project had taken 8 months and required me to coordinate with federal banking regulators, law enforcement agencies, and international cybersecurity firms. The technical specifications alone filled 300 pages of documentation that carried classification levels most people had never heard of. When we successfully implemented the new system without a single day of downtime, the consortium's board had voted unanimously to expand our contract for another 5 years. None of this was public knowledge. Banking security arrangements weren't announced in press releases or celebrated at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. The consortium's annual report mentioned enhanced digital security measures in a single paragraph buried on page 43. The more effective our protection became, the less visible our work appeared to outside observers. My personal income from Quantum Shield had reached levels that would have surprised even Victoria, despite her success in luxury real estate. The banking consortium contract alone generated more revenue than her entire real estate team's annual sales volume. But the money wasn't the primary motivation. It was the intellectual challenge of staying ahead of increasingly sophisticated threats. Every morning, I arrived at the Thornfield facility by 7 a.m. to review overnight threat assessments from our automated monitoring systems. The previous week had brought attempted intrusions from what appeared to be state-sponsored hackers targeting the medical center's research database, a coordinated botnet attack against 3 consortium banks, and a ransomware campaign that our filters had intercepted before it could encrypt a single file at Titanium Manufacturing. Each successful defense was a puzzle solved, a crisis averted, a system strengthened. But none of these victories translated into stories I could share at family dinners or achievements I could display on social media. The better I became at my job, the more invisible my expertise appeared to people outside the industry. My team members understood the paradox. Jennifer Nakamura, my lead network architect, had left a prestigious position at Apex Technologies to join Quantum Shield because she was tired of corporate politics interfering with technical excellence. In this job, she told me during her first week, success means no one ever knows your name. That's either terrifying or liberating, depending on your personality. David Chan, our threat analysis specialist, had previously worked for the National Security Agency before deciding he preferred private sector challenges. His security clearance remained active, which allowed us to bid on contracts that bridged civilian and government sectors. Most people think cybersecurity is about building walls, he had explained to a new hire. Really, it's about understanding how attackers think and staying 3 moves ahead of them. The technical complexity of our work meant that even describing our projects to outsiders required extensive background explanation. When Victoria occasionally asked what I was working on, I'd learned to give simplified answers that satisfied her curiosity without revealing confidential information. Network security for some local businesses was technically accurate, but conveyed nothing about the scale or sophistication of our operations. This communication gap had widened over the years as my expertise deepened in areas that had no equivalent in Victoria's professional experience. I could spend hours discussing zero-day vulnerabilities, blockchain security protocols, or artificial intelligence threat modeling with my colleagues, but translating these concepts for family members felt like trying to explain quantum physics using only vocabulary from elementary school science class vocabulary. The regulatory environment surrounding cybersecurity also imposed constraints on public discussion that Victoria's industry didn't face. When she closed a major real estate deal, she could celebrate openly, share details in interviews, and use the success as marketing material for future clients. My biggest victories often came with non-disclosure agreements that prohibited me from mentioning the client's name, the nature of the threat, or sometimes even the fact that any security incident had occurred. 6 months ago, I'd led the response to what could have been a catastrophic breach of the power grid serving the greater Riverside metropolitan area. A sophisticated attack had penetrated the utility company's industrial control systems and was preparing to disrupt electricity distribution during peak summer demand. Our intervention had prevented widespread blackouts that could have affected hospitals, data centers, and critical infrastructure across the region. The entire crisis had unfolded over 72 hours, during which I'd coordinated with federal energy regulators, utility engineers, and law enforcement agencies to trace the attack vectors and implement defensive measures. When we finally neutralized the threat, the utility's chief executive had called it the most professional security response I've witnessed in 30 years of infrastructure management. But the incident never appeared in news reports. The utility company's public statement mentioned routine maintenance that had temporarily reduced capacity in certain districts. My company received a commendation letter that I couldn't show to anyone outside our organization. The bonus payment helped fund our expansion into artificial intelligence security research, but even that achievement had to remain confidential. These restrictions created a peculiar form of professional isolation. While Victoria's success was publicly visible and socially validated, mine existed in a parallel world where recognition came from industry peers and satisfied clients rather than community visibility. I'd learned to find satisfaction in technical excellence and problem solving rather than external acknowledgement.
The financial rewards had allowed me to maintain my modest lifestyle while building substantial savings and investment portfolios that Victoria would have found surprising. I'd purchased the entire building that housed Quantum Shield rather than renting space, giving us complete control over physical security and room for expansion. My personal residence remained the simple Millbrook apartment, but I'd bought the building and renovated the other units as housing for team members who preferred short commutes. My approach to wealth was influenced by the same principles that guided my professional work: effectiveness over visibility, substance over appearance. While Victoria drove a luxury sedan that announced her success to everyone who saw it, I maintained a modest electric vehicle that drew no attention but reflected my commitment to environmental responsibility and operational efficiency. The contrast between our public profiles had become increasingly absurd. Victoria appeared regularly in Riverside Business Journal articles about real estate trends and was frequently photographed at charity galas and networking events. Meanwhile, I'd been invited to present research at the International Conference on Cybersecurity, served on advisory boards for 3 federal agencies, and consulted with foreign governments on critical infrastructure protection. But none of these achievements translated into local recognition. When Victoria introduced me as someone who was still figuring things out, she wasn't being deliberately deceptive. From her perspective, my invisible professional success looked indistinguishable from unemployment. My reluctance to discuss work details reinforced her assumption that there wasn't much worth discussing. The situation had reached a level of irony that sometimes felt surreal. Victoria's clients included executives from companies that depended on my security services to protect their operations. Her real estate transactions were processed through banking systems that my protocol secured. Her industry's digital marketing campaigns relied on internet infrastructure that my threat monitoring helped keep functional. But she remained completely unaware of these connections. In her mental model of the business ecosystem, cybersecurity was either handled by large corporations' internal IT departments or outsourced to national firms with household names. The possibility that her struggling sister might be running a sophisticated operation that served major regional clients simply didn't exist within her framework for understanding professional success. This disconnect was about to become a problem in ways that neither of us could have anticipated. Victoria's condescension had evolved from casual commentary into a public performance art. What began as sisterly concern had transformed into something more deliberate, a systematic campaign to position herself as the family's success story, while casting me as the cautionary tale that made her achievements shine brighter. The escalation became particularly pronounced after Victoria was featured on the cover of Metro Property magazine as Realtor of the Year. The article praised her innovative marketing strategies and her ability to close deals in challenging market conditions. Our parents framed the magazine cover and displayed it prominently in their living room right next to Victoria's university diploma and various professional awards. At the celebration dinner they hosted in Victoria's honor, she used her acceptance speech as an opportunity to reflect on the importance of family support and personal determination. "Some people think success comes naturally," she'd said, glancing meaningfully in my direction. "But it requires discipline, commitment to your goals, and sometimes making difficult choices about what you're willing to sacrifice for your future." The implication was clear to everyone at the table. While Victoria had demonstrated the discipline necessary for professional achievement, I had chosen the easier path of avoiding commitment and accountability. Her success proved what was possible with the right mindset, while my situation illustrated the consequences of lacking direction and realistic expectations. These public comparisons became a regular feature of family gatherings. When cousin Amanda announced her promotion to department manager at Clearwater Insurance, Victoria would nod approvingly and comment, "It's so important to have concrete goals and measurable progress. Some people drift for years without building anything substantial, but Amanda understands that career advancement requires strategic thinking." The message was always delivered with a tone of general wisdom about professional development, but the timing and context made the target obvious. I would sit quietly, taking another sip of wine, while family members nodded along with Victoria's insights about the importance of traditional career structures and financial stability. Victoria's boyfriend Michael had become an unwitting accomplice in these performances. As a marketing director at Pinnacle Communications, he represented the kind of corporate success that Victoria considered the gold standard for professional achievement. When the conversation turned to career topics, Michael would share stories about his company's growth strategies, content acquisitions, and team management challenges. "The key is building relationships with decision makers," Michael would explain, clearly enjoying his role as the expert on business development. "You can't just do good work in isolation and expect people to discover you. You have to actively network, attend industry events, and make sure the right people know what you bring to the table." Victoria would beam with pride during these monologues, occasionally adding observations like, "Exactly. That's what I try to tell people who think they can build a career without engaging with a professional community. Visibility matters just as much as competence." Her eyes would find mine during these moments, making sure I understood that this wisdom was being shared for my benefit. The pattern intensified when Victoria began hosting monthly dinner parties for what she called her Professional Development Circle, a group of ambitious young professionals who met to share career strategies and business opportunities. These gatherings took place at her downtown apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and carefully curated modern furniture that screamed success to anyone who entered. I was always invited to these events, ostensibly because Victoria wanted to include family in her social activities. But my presence served a different purpose.
I was the living example of what happened when someone lacked the drive and strategic thinking that characterized everyone else in the room.
This is my sister Camila, Victoria would say during introductions. She's been exploring different options in the technology space, still trying to find her niche. The phrase "still trying" carried particular weight when delivered to a room full of people who had already found their niches and were building upon them systematically. The other attendees would smile politely and ask vague questions about my interests, but the conversation would quickly move to more substantive topics like market trends, professional development opportunities, and success stories from their respective industries. I became background scenery in discussions about ambitious people doing ambitious things. During one particularly memorable evening, a guest named Harrison Webb, who worked in venture capital, had given an impromptu presentation about identifying promising startups. The biggest mistake entrepreneurs make, he'd explained, is thinking that having a good idea is enough. Execution is everything. You need business development skills, financial planning, market analysis, and the ability to communicate your value proposition to investors who see hundreds of pitches every month. Victoria had nodded enthusiastically throughout his presentation. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking that separates successful entrepreneurs from people who just have hobbies they think might be profitable someday. Her comment was accompanied by a glance that made sure everyone understood she was speaking from experience observing both types of people. The social media dimension of Victoria's campaign added another layer of public humiliation. Her Instagram account documented a steady stream of professional achievements, industry events, and lifestyle markers that reinforced her image as someone who had successfully transitioned from college to meaningful career building. Photos from business conferences, charity galas, and exclusive restaurant openings were interspersed with inspirational quotes about persistence, goal setting, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who challenged you to grow. The subtext was always about the choices that separated winners from drifters. When Victoria posted about family events, the captions invariably included observations about different approaches to life planning. A photo from our father's birthday celebration was accompanied by text that read, "Grateful for family time and the reminder that we all mature at different paces. Some people know exactly what they want and go after it systematically. Others need more time to figure things out. Both paths have value, but I'm thankful I chose the one that's given me security and purpose." These posts received dozens of likes and comments from Victoria's professional network, all reinforcing her wisdom about career development and personal growth. Colleagues would respond with their own stories about the importance of making difficult decisions and staying focused on long-term objectives. The emotional manipulation was sophisticated because it was wrapped in genuine concern and delivered with perfect sincerity. Victoria wasn't consciously trying to humiliate me. She genuinely believed she was providing helpful perspective and encouragement. Her condescension felt loving because, from her viewpoint, she was offering guidance to someone who clearly needed it. This made responding to her behavior particularly difficult. Any attempt to defend my choices or correct her assumptions would have appeared defensive and would have confirmed her analysis that I was uncomfortable with honest feedback about my situation. Staying silent preserved my dignity, but allowed her narrative to continue unchallenged. Victoria's escalating campaign reached its peak during a family barbecue at our parents' house, where she'd invited Michael's boss, Sandra Mitchell, who served as regional director for Pinnacle Communications. Sandra was exactly the kind of accomplished professional woman that Victoria aspired to become: confident, articulate, and clearly comfortable with the power dynamics of corporate leadership. During dinner, Sandra had shared stories about building teams, managing client relationships, and navigating the challenges of rapid company growth. Victoria hung on every word, asking intelligent questions and making observations that demonstrated her understanding of business strategy and organizational development. "The hardest part of my job," Sandra had explained, "is identifying people who have the potential for leadership roles versus those who prefer to remain individual contributors. Some people have natural entrepreneurial instincts, while others are more comfortable with structured environments where expectations are clearly defined." Victoria had seized this opportunity to offer her own insights about different personality types and career preferences. "I think some people are naturally drawn to traditional success metrics, income growth, professional recognition, advancement opportunities, while others prioritize flexibility and creative expression over financial security. Neither approach is wrong, but they lead to very different outcomes. Her analysis was delivered while looking directly at me, making sure everyone at the table understood she was speaking from first-hand observation of both personality types. Sandra had nodded thoughtfully and complimented Victoria on her mature perspective about individual differences in professional motivation. The conversation had continued for another hour, with Victoria and Sandra discussing industry trends, networking strategies, and the importance of building professional brands that clearly communicated your value to potential clients and employers. I sat through the entire performance, eating potato salad, and wondering how long Victoria could sustain this level of systematic condescension without someone eventually calling her out. But that evening also marked the beginning of something different. As I listened to Sandra discuss the challenges of managing large client accounts and complex project timelines, I realized that her company was almost certainly using cybersecurity services that involved my work in ways she probably didn't recognize. Pinnacle Communications handled marketing campaigns for several major regional businesses, including at least 3 companies that contracted with Quantum Shield for network protection. Sandra's confident discussion of client relationship management was taking place within a digital ecosystem that my team helped secure, even though she had no idea that the unsuccessful sister sitting across from her had any connection to the infrastructure that made her work possible. The irony was about to become much more apparent in ways that would fundamentally alter the dynamic that Victoria had spent years carefully constructing.
My decision to remain silent about my professional achievements wasn't born from shame or insecurity. It was a calculated strategy that had served multiple purposes over the years. Every time Victoria delivered another public assessment of my supposed shortcomings, I made a conscious choice to let her words hang in the air unchallenged, knowing that patience would eventually prove more powerful than any immediate defense. The origins of this approach traced back to a conversation I'd had with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a cybersecurity consultant who'd become both a mentor and occasional collaborator on complex projects. During a late-night debugging session at her firm's offices in Capitol Heights, she'd shared insights about professional positioning that had fundamentally shaped my thinking about public visibility and career strategy. The most dangerous people in this industry, Elena had told me while we traced malicious code through network logs, are the ones nobody sees coming. The moment you start announcing your capabilities, you become a target for both competitors and threats. But more importantly, you lose the advantage of being underestimated. Her words had resonated because they aligned with something I'd observed in my own family dynamics. Victoria's need to broadcast her achievements created certain vulnerabilities, expectations she had to meet, images she had to maintain, and a constant requirement to justify her position as the successful sister. My invisibility, by contrast, gave me complete freedom to operate without external pressure or scrutiny. The strategic value of silence became even more apparent as Quantum Shield grew in both size and sophistication. While Victoria was posting Instagram photos from networking events and industry conferences, I was quietly building relationships with decision makers who valued discretion over publicity. Federal contracting officers, bank security directors, and corporate executives weren't looking for consultants who needed social media validation. They wanted competent professionals who could solve problems without creating additional public relations concerns. My client relationships were built on trust and results, rather than marketing and visibility. When the Riverside Regional Banking Consortium had experienced their security breach crisis, they haven't chosen Quantum Shield because we had impressive website testimonials or awards on display in our reception area. They'd selected us because David Chen's former NSA colleagues had quietly recommended our technical capabilities to the right people at the right moment. This approach required a different kind of professional confidence, the ability to measure success through internal metrics rather than external recognition. While Victoria's achievements were validated through magazine covers and industry awards, mine were confirmed through contract renewals, expansion of security clearances, and increasing complexity of the projects we were trusted to handle. The psychological aspects of maintaining strategic silence were more challenging than the professional benefits suggested. Sitting through Victoria's dinner party presentations, while knowing that half of the companies being discussed as examples of successful marketing relied on infrastructure I'd helped secure, required a level of self-discipline that sometimes felt almost absurd. During Harrison Webb's venture capital presentation, he spent 20 minutes explaining how promising startups needed to demonstrate scalable security protocols before they could attract serious investment. What he didn't know was that his own firm's due diligence process relied on threat assessment tools that incorporated algorithms my team had developed for identifying vulnerabilities in emerging technology platforms. The irony extended beyond individual conversations to entire social ecosystems. Victoria's professional network included marketing directors, real estate developers, financial advisors, and business consultants who moved seamlessly through Riverside's commercial landscape. But that landscape existed within digital infrastructure that was increasingly dependent on specialized security services that remained invisible to most of the people who benefited from them daily. My strategic silence also served as protection for my team and clients. Cybersecurity work attracted attention from the same criminal networks and hostile actors we were paid to defend against. The less public information available about Quantum Shield's specific capabilities or client relationships, the harder it became for potential threats to identify targets or develop countermeasures. Jennifer Nakamura initially questioned this low-profile approach when she joined the company. Coming from a corporate environment where professional advancement required internal visibility and recognition, she'd found our emphasis on discretion frustrating. How do we attract top talent if nobody knows what we're accomplishing? She'd asked during one of our quarterly strategy meetings. The answer became clear when we'd successfully recruited Dr. Sarah Kim, an artificial intelligence specialist whose previous work on predictive threat modeling had been classified at levels that prevented her from discussing it publicly. Sarah had chosen Quantum Shield specifically because we offered sophisticated technical challenges without requiring her to compromise her commitment to operational security. Our reputation among people who mattered was built on results rather than publicity. This created a peculiar form of professional satisfaction that Victoria's world couldn't provide. When we successfully prevented a cyber attack that could have disrupted medical equipment at Westbridge Medical Center, the victory was measured in lives protected rather than headlines generated. When our protocols stopped a coordinated attempt to steal manufacturing designs from Titanium Industries, success meant preserving competitive advantages rather than earning public recognition. But strategic silence also meant accepting that most people, including my own family, would never understand the scope or importance of my professional contributions. Victoria's work had clear, visible outcomes. Buildings sold, clients satisfied, commissions earned. My most significant achievements were defined by things that didn't happen. Breaches that never occurred, attacks that were intercepted, systems that continued functioning smoothly because threats were neutralized before they could cause damage. The emotional discipline required for maintaining this approach had been tested repeatedly during Victoria's escalating campaign of public condescension. Each dinner party introduction as someone who was still figuring things out represented a choice between protecting my professional position and defending my personal dignity. I'd consistently chosen the former, understanding that temporary social discomfort was a reasonable price for long-term strategic advantage.
The decision became easier when I considered the alternatives. If I'd chosen to correct Victoria's assumptions by revealing details about Quantum Shield's client roster or contract values, the information would have spread through her social network within days. Riverside's business community was small enough that confidential details had a way of becoming general knowledge, especially when they contradicted established narratives about someone's professional status. More importantly, defending my achievements would have required explaining work that most people lacked the technical background to evaluate accurately. Victoria's success in real estate was easily understood. Properties had prices, sales had commission structures, and market performance could be measured through publicly available data. Cybersecurity success was measured in prevented disasters, protected information, and maintained system integrity, concepts that didn't translate well to casual conversation. My strategic silence had also created unexpected advantages in my actual professional relationships. Clients appreciated working with someone who didn't need credit or recognition beyond the contracted deliverables.
Federal agencies valued contractors who understood that the most important victories were the ones that never appeared in congressional testimony or public audits. Corporate executives preferred security providers who solved problems without creating internal politics or media attention. This approach had influenced how I'd built Quantum Shield's entire organizational culture. Our team meetings focused on technical challenges and operational improvements rather than business development or marketing strategies. Our success metrics emphasized client satisfaction and security effectiveness rather than industry recognition or revenue growth. We measured our reputation through contract renewals and referrals rather than awards or media coverage. The contrast with Victoria's approach to professional development was stark, but not accidental. She'd built her career on visibility, networking, and personal branding because real estate success required constant client acquisition and public trust in her expertise. My industry rewarded the opposite characteristics: discretion, technical competence, and the ability to work effectively within confidential environments. But the psychological cost of strategic silence was becoming harder to ignore as Victoria's behavior grew more systematically dismissive. The family barbecue conversation with Sandra Mitchell had represented a new level of public humiliation that tested the limits of my commitment to remaining invisible. Listening to Victoria offer insights about entrepreneurial success while Sandra nodded approvingly had required every bit of self-control I'd developed over years of similar situations. The moment when Sandra had discussed identifying people with natural entrepreneurial instincts versus those who preferred structured environments had been particularly challenging to endure silently. As someone who'd built a company from nothing while maintaining federal security clearances and managing complex client relationships across multiple industries, I possessed exactly the entrepreneurial capabilities that Sandra claimed to value in her own employees. Yet, my strategic silence meant allowing Victoria to position herself as the family expert on business development and professional growth, while I remained the cautionary example of someone who'd failed to demonstrate those same qualities. The performance had been so perfectly orchestrated that even I had to admire Victoria's skill at manipulating social dynamics to reinforce her preferred narrative. But strategic silence was approaching its expiration date. The gap between Victoria's assumptions and reality had grown so large that maintaining the deception was becoming more difficult than revealing the truth. And circumstances were about to create a situation where my professional identity could no longer remain hidden, regardless of how carefully I'd protected it. The invitation arrived on Meridian Country Club letterhead, embossed with gold trim that announced its importance before I'd even opened the envelope. Victoria had been selected to receive the Regional Business Excellence Award at their annual networking gala, an honor that would cement her status as one of Riverside's most prominent young professionals. "You have to come," Victoria had insisted when she called to share the news. "It's going to be the biggest business event of the year. Everyone who matters in the city will be there. Bank presidents, development executives, city council members, even the governor might make an appearance." The event was scheduled for the following Saturday at the country club's grand ballroom, with cocktails beginning at 6 and dinner service starting at 7:30. Victoria explained that recipients of the Business Excellence Award were expected to give brief acceptance speeches about their professional journeys and the factors that had contributed to their success. "This is exactly the kind of visibility that builds long-term career opportunities," she had said, her excitement palpable even through the phone. "Sandra thinks this could lead to speaking opportunities, maybe even a position on some corporate boards. You really should attend. It might be educational to see how professional networking actually works." The subtle discontention in her final comment was so familiar that I barely registered it. But something else about the invitation caught my attention as I scanned the guest list that Victoria had forwarded. The gala's corporate sponsors included several organizations that I recognized from a very different context than Victoria realized. Westbridge Medical Center was listed as the presenting sponsor, their logo prominently displayed on the invitation's header. Riverside Regional Banking Consortium appeared as a platinum-level supporter, along with Titanium Manufacturing as a gold sponsor. These weren't just random businesses celebrating Victoria's achievement. They were 3 of Quantum Shield's most significant clients.
The realization created a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with Victoria's upcoming triumph. If key executives from these organizations attended the gala, there was a reasonable possibility that someone might recognize me in a social context where my connection to Victoria would be immediately apparent.
But declining to attend wasn't a realistic option. Victoria had already informed our parents about the invitation, and they'd begun making plans to drive up from Pinewood Valley for the occasion. Our mother had started shopping for what she called appropriate attire for mixing with Riverside's business elite, while our father had researched the country club's history and membership requirements with the thoroughness he usually reserved for investment decisions. The family's excitement about Victoria's recognition made my concerns seem petty and selfish. This was her moment of professional validation, the culmination of years of strategic career building and relationship development. My reluctance to celebrate her success would be interpreted as jealousy or antisocial behavior, especially given the family's existing concerns about my social adjustment and career direction. I called Jennifer Nakamura to discuss the potential complications of attending an event where several major clients might be present. Her response was characteristically direct and practical. "How many people from these organizations actually know what you look like?" she asked. "Most of our client interactions happen through secure video conferences or controlled facility visits. Unless you've had extensive face-to-face contact with their senior executives, the chances of recognition are probably minimal." She had a point. My work with Westbridge Medical Center was primarily conducted through their IT security department, with occasional briefings to administrative directors who focused on compliance rather than relationship building. The banking consortium contracts involved interactions with technical specialists and risk management personnel rather than the public-facing executives who would likely attend a social gala. "Besides," Jennifer continued, "even if someone does recognize you, what's the worst-case scenario? They introduce themselves professionally and maybe mention working with your company. That's not exactly a catastrophic security breach." Her analysis was logical, but it didn't account for the psychological dynamics that would be unleashed if Victoria discovered that her directionless sister was professionally connected to the same business leaders who were celebrating her achievements. The revelation would force both of us to confront years of assumptions, misunderstandings, and carefully maintained deceptions. Still, the probability of recognition seemed low enough to justify the risk. I accepted Victoria's invitation and began preparing for an evening that would require a different kind of performance than my usual professional interactions. Instead of projecting technical competence and security expertise, I would need to maintain the role of supportive but unremarkable younger sister while navigating a room full of people who might unknowingly depend on my work for their organizational security. The week leading up to the gala was filled with Victoria's increasingly detailed descriptions of her preparation strategy. She'd purchased a new dress from an upscale boutique in the financial district, scheduled appointments for professional hair and makeup styling, and drafted multiple versions of her acceptance speech with input from Michael and Sandra Mitchell. The key is striking the right balance between confidence and humility. I want to acknowledge my achievements without appearing arrogant. And I want to inspire other young professionals without making it sound easy or accidental. Her approach to the speech reflected the same strategic thinking that had built her real estate career. She'd researched the backgrounds of previous award recipients, analyzed which messages resonated most effectively with Riverside's business community, and crafted content that would reinforce her personal brand while appealing to potential clients and collaborators in the audience. I'm planning to focus on the importance of perseverance and continuous learning, but I also want to touch on how different people find success through different paths. Some people know exactly what they want from the beginning and pursue it systematically. Others need more time to discover their strength and find their direction.
The inclusion of commentary about different paths to success suggested that Victoria was planning to reference me in her speech, probably as an example of patient family support for someone still finding their way professionally. The prospect of being used as a motivational talking point about delayed development was almost as uncomfortable as the possibility of being recognized by client executives. 3 days before the gala, Sandra Mitchell called Victoria with what she described as exciting news about additional networking opportunities. One of Pinnacle Communications' major accounts, Meridian Financial Group, had requested a pre-event meeting to discuss potential marketing collaborations that could benefit from Victoria's real estate expertise and industry connections. This could be the beginning of a really significant business relationship, Victoria had explained to me during our final coordination call. Sandra thinks Meridian might be interested in developing residential marketing strategies that target high-net-worth individuals who are relocating to the Riverside area for career opportunities. The irony was becoming almost surreal. Meridian Financial Group had been one of Quantum Shield's first major contracts, a relationship that had developed through my connection with Dr. Elena Rodriguez and her network of federal consulting contacts. Their trust in our cybersecurity capabilities had provided the credibility foundation that allowed us to compete for larger contracts with the banking consortium and other regional institutions. Now, Victoria was preparing to discuss marketing strategies with the same organization that had helped establish my company's reputation in the financial services sector. The overlap was no longer a theoretical possibility. It was an inevitable convergence that would occur in a public setting where both our professional identities would be fully visible. The final preparation detail that Victoria mentioned was almost casual but carried implications that made my anxiety spike toward genuine alarm. The award presentation ceremony would include brief video profiles of each recipient, featuring interviews with colleagues, clients, and industry partners who could speak to their professional contributions and community impact.
They interviewed Sandra, Michael, and a few of my major clients, Victoria had said proudly. But they also wanted to include family perspectives, so they asked if you and our parents would be willing to say a few words about supporting someone's career development from a personal standpoint. The video interview had already been recorded, apparently with our parents providing thoughtful comments about watching Victoria build her professional reputation through dedication and strategic relationship building. The interviewer had also requested my participation, but Victoria had explained that I preferred to avoid public speaking and would rather not appear on camera. I told them you're more of a behind-the-scenes person, she'd said with what sounded like affectionate understanding. Some people are naturally comfortable with publicity, while others contribute in quieter ways. Her protection of my privacy preferences had been genuinely considerate, but it also reinforced the public narrative about my personality and professional limitations. The video profile would present Victoria as someone with strong family support from parents who understood her ambitions and a sister who preferred to remain in the background rather than compete for attention. Saturday afternoon arrived with unseasonably warm weather that made the country club's terrace and garden areas particularly inviting for pre-dinner cocktails. I spent the morning reviewing client security protocols and system updates, partly from professional habit and partly to maintain some connection to my actual identity before spending the evening performing as Victoria's unremarkable younger sister. The dress I'd chosen was deliberately understated. Navy blue, conservative cut, minimal jewelry. Nothing that would draw attention or suggest any particular level of professional success or social status. I wanted to blend into the background of accomplished people while remaining appropriately dressed for a formal business event. As I drove toward Meridian Country Club that evening, watching the sun set behind the tree line that bordered Riverside's most exclusive residential district, I had no way of anticipating how dramatically the careful boundaries I'd maintained between different aspects of my life were about to be destroyed by a conversation I couldn't avoid and recognition I couldn't control. The Meridian Country Club's grand ballroom buzzed with the controlled energy of Riverside's business elite gathering for their annual celebration of professional excellence.
Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across tables draped in pristine white linens, while servers moved efficiently between clusters of impeccably dressed executives, attorneys, and civic leaders who represented the region's economic power structure. I stood near the bar with a glass of sparkling water, watching Victoria work the room with the same methodical precision she applied to real estate negotiations. She moved from conversation to conversation, introducing herself to potential clients, reinforcing relationships with existing contacts, and positioning herself strategically within sightlines of the evening's most influential attendees. Our parents had positioned themselves at a high-top table near the presentation stage, clearly proud to be included in an event that showcased their successful daughter's achievements. My father kept adjusting his tie and checking his watch, while my mother surveyed the crowd with the satisfied expression of someone whose predictions about Victoria's potential had been thoroughly validated. The evening's program indicated that award presentations would begin after dinner service, giving recipients time to network with sponsors and guests before delivering their acceptance speeches. Victoria had already completed her pre-event meeting with Meridian Financial Group representatives, emerging from their private discussion with barely contained excitement about what she described as incredible collaboration opportunities. I was scanning the crowd for familiar faces when a voice behind me said, "Excuse me, but aren't you Camila Torres in Quantum Shield Security?" I turned to find Dr. Margaret Walsh, Chief Information Officer for Westbridge Medical Center, extending her hand with a warm professional smile. Dr. Walsh was someone I'd worked with extensively during the implementation of enhanced cybersecurity protocols for the hospital system's patient data networks and medical device security infrastructure. "Dr. Walsh," I replied, accepting her handshake, while my mind raced through potential response strategies. "I didn't expect to see you here this evening." "Westbridge is one of the event sponsors," she explained, gesturing toward the corporate logo displays near the entrance. "We try to support regional business excellence initiatives, especially when they recognize the kind of innovation thinking that drives economic development." Her mention of innovative thinking carried particular weight because Dr. Walsh understood exactly what kind of innovation my team had brought to healthcare cybersecurity challenges. 6 months earlier, we'd prevented what could have been a catastrophic ransomware attack on Westbridge's surgical scheduling systems during a particularly critical period when they were handling trauma cases from a multi-vehicle accident. "Are you here representing Quantum Shield Security?" Dr. Walsh asked, glancing around as if expecting to see other members of my team. "I didn't realize your company was involved with tonight's sponsors." Before I could formulate a response that would preserve some separation between my professional identity and family connections, Victoria appeared at my elbow with her practice networking smile and an obvious intention to manage the conversation. "Margaret, I'd like to meet my sister Camila," she said, smoothly inserting herself between Dr. Walsh and me. "Camila, this is Dr. Margaret Walsh from Westbridge Medical Center. Margaret and I were just discussing some potential collaboration opportunities between healthcare facilities and residential development projects." The expression that crossed Dr. Walsh's face was a mixture of confusion and dawning realization that created exactly the scenario I'd been hoping to avoid. She looked from Victoria to me and back again, clearly processing information that didn't align with her existing understanding of either my professional identity or family relationships. "I'm sorry," she said carefully, "but I think there might be some confusion. Camila is the founder and CEO of Quantum Shield Security. We've been working together on critical infrastructure protection for the past 2 years."
The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but it felt like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Victoria's confident networking expression dissolved into bewilderment, then shifted rapidly through several stages of cognitive recalibration before settling into something that resembled genuine shock. "I don't understand," Victoria said, looking directly at me with an intensity that made several nearby conversations pause. "CEO of what company?" Dr. Walsh realized she'd inadvertently created a family drama in the middle of a professional networking event. Her medical training in managing crisis situations immediately activated as she attempted to provide clarifying information that might help resolve what appeared to be a misunderstanding. "Quantum Shield is one of the most sophisticated cybersecurity firms in the region," Dr. Walsh explained to Victoria with the patient tone she probably used when discussing complex diagnoses with family members.
Camila's team has been instrumental in protecting our hospital networks from increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. Just last month, they prevented an attack that could have compromised patient safety systems across our entire facility network. Victoria's face went through another series of expressions as she processed this information. The woman who had spent years positioning herself as the family expert on professional success and business development was learning that her unsuccessful sister had been running a company that provided critical services to major regional institutions. But she works from her apartment, Victoria said weakly, as if this detail might somehow invalidate Dr. Walsh's professional assessment. She doesn't have an office or employees or... Our primary facility is in Thornfield, I said quietly, finally accepting that the careful separation I had maintained between different aspects of my life was permanently destroyed. We have a full operations center and a team of specialists who handle cybersecurity for multiple industries. Dr. Walsh nodded enthusiastically, apparently relieved to clarify what she assumed had been a simple miscommunication. The work they do is absolutely critical for healthcare operations. Most people don't realize how vulnerable medical facilities are to cyber attacks, or how devastating the consequences can be when patient care systems are compromised. Victoria's face went through another series of expressions as she processed this information. The woman who had spent years positioning herself as the family expert on professional success and business development was learning that her unsuccessful sister had been running a company that provided critical services to major regional institutions. But she works from her apartment, Victoria said weakly, as if this detail might somehow invalidate Dr. Walsh's professional assessment. She doesn't have an office or employees or... Our primary facility is in Thornfield, I said quietly, finally accepting that the careful separation I'd maintained between different aspects of my life was permanently destroyed. We have a full operations center and a team of specialists who handle cybersecurity for multiple industries. Dr. Walsh nodded enthusiastically, apparently relieved to clarify what she assumed had been a simple miscommunication. The work they do is absolutely critical for healthcare operations. Most people don't realize how vulnerable medical facilities are to cyber attacks, or how devastating the consequences can be when patient care systems are compromised. Victoria's was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not condescension or concern or sisterly affection, but something closer to recognition mixed with disbelief. "You run a cybersecurity company," she said slowly, as if testing how the words sounded when spoken out loud. "She runs the cybersecurity company," Dr. Walsh corrected with professional precision. Quantum Shield has become the regional standard for healthcare network protection. They're also working with several financial institutions and manufacturing firms that require the highest levels of digital security. The conversation was attracting attention from other guests who had noticed the unusual intensity of our discussion. Several people from Victoria's professional network were glancing in our direction with curiosity, while others seemed to be positioning themselves to overhear whatever revelation was unfolding near the bar area. "How long?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long? What?" I replied, though I know exactly what she was asking. "How long have you been running this company while I've been—" She trailed off, apparently unable to complete the sentence that would acknowledge years of systematic condescension directed towards someone's professional achievements significantly exceeded her own. Dr. Walsh sensed the family tension that was building around information she assumed was common knowledge. "I should probably let you two discuss this privately," she said diplomatically. "Camila, thank you again for everything your team has done for Westbridge. The board remains extremely impressed with the quality and reliability of your services." She moved away toward another group of healthcare executives, leaving Victoria and me facing each other with the weight of years of misunderstandings and assumptions that had just been obliterated by professional recognition from one of the region's most respected medical administrators. "Why didn't you tell me?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying a mixture of hurt and confusion that suggested she was beginning to process the implications of what she'd learned. Before I could respond, another voice interrupted our conversation. "Camila Torres, from Quantum Shield?"
We both turned to see Robert Hamilton, Senior Vice President for Digital Operations at Riverside Regional Banking Consortium, approaching with the kind of confident stride that indicated he was accustomed to being recognized at professional events. "Mr. Hamilton," I acknowledged, extending my hand for what was becoming an increasingly awkward series of professional introductions in a family context. "I had no idea you'd be here tonight," he said with genuine enthusiasm. "I was just telling my colleagues about the outstanding work your team did on our network integration project. The seamless implementation you managed across 17 institutions was absolutely remarkable." Victoria's expression had progressed beyond shock into something approaching existential crisis. Robert Hamilton was exactly the type of senior financial executive that she aspired to cultivate as a client for high-end real estate transactions. His recognition of my professional credentials was destroying her understanding of both my capabilities and the business relationships that define success in Riverside's professional community. "This is my sister Victoria," I said, accepting that further attempts to maintain separation between my professional and family identities were pointless. "Victoria Torres," she managed, extending her hand with the automatic politeness that survived even psychological shock. "Excellent," Robert said warmly. "You must be very proud of your sister's achievements. The Banking Consortium Board considers Quantum Shield to be one of the most valuable partnerships we've developed in recent years. The level of expertise and professionalism they bring to critical infrastructure protection is truly exceptional." His praise was delivered with the authority of someone whose professional opinion carried weight throughout the region's financial sector. Victoria stood there, absorbing recognition of my professional accomplishments from exactly the type of business leader that she had spent years trying to earn through her own career development efforts.
The revelation was complete, delivered not through any defensive explanation from me, but through spontaneous professional recognition from respected industry leaders who understood the value and sophistication of the work I'd been doing while Victoria had been constructing narratives about my lack of direction and career focus. The remainder of the evening unfolded with a surreal quality that made ordinary social interactions feel like navigating through thick fog. Victoria moved through the dinner service and award presentations in a state of visible disorientation, her usual confident networking persona replaced by something resembling shell shock as she processed the fundamental revision of reality that had occurred at the bar. During dinner, she sat beside me at our assigned table, but spoke primarily in monosyllables when other guests attempted conversation. Our parents, positioned across from us, remained unaware that anything significant had transpired. They chatted enthusiastically with other attendees about Victoria's upcoming recognition and shared stories about watching both their daughters develop their respective career paths. When Victoria's moment arrived to accept the Regional Business Excellence Award, she delivered her prepared speech with professional competence, but none of the enthusiasm that had characterized her preparation. Her comments about perseverance and different paths to success took on unintended meaning as she spoke them while looking directly at me, perhaps finally understanding that the different path she'd been describing had actually led to destinations she hadn't imagined possible. The applause for her acceptance speech was warm and sustained, reflecting genuine respect from Riverside's business community for her achievements in real estate development and client relationship management. But I watched her face during the standing ovation and saw someone who was struggling to reconcile external validation with internal confusion about fundamental assumptions that had just been destroyed. After the formal presentations concluded and guests began moving toward the terrace for after-dinner cocktails, Victoria finally found her voice for the conversation we both knew was inevitable. "We need to talk," she said simply, steering us toward a quiet corner of the ballroom where the evening's noise would provide some privacy for what promised to be a difficult discussion. "I know," I replied, setting down my untouched dessert plate and following her to a pair of chairs positioned near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the country club's illuminated gardens. Victoria sat down carefully, smoothing her award ceremony dress before looking at me with an expression that combined hurt, confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. "How long have I been wrong about everything?" she asked quietly. "About 5 years," I said, deciding that this conversation required complete honesty rather than diplomatic softening of uncomfortable truths.
Since I started Quantum Shield and began building the client relationships that you've been hearing about tonight. She absorbed this information with visible effort, as if each detail required conscious processing before it could be integrated into her understanding of reality. 5 years of me telling everyone you were struggling to find direction. 5 years of me letting you, I corrected. This wasn't something that happened to you. We both made choices that created this situation. Victoria's face shifted through several expressions as she considered the implications of shared responsibility rather than simple misunderstanding. But why? Why would you let me think you were unemployed when you were running a successful company? Why would you let me worry about your financial stability when you were earning... She paused, apparently afraid to complete the question. More than your entire real estate team's annual commission volume, I finished for her. Because my industry requires discretion. And because correcting your assumptions would have created more problems than it solved. The financial comparison landed with visible impact, though Victoria's response suggested she was beginning to process information through a different framework than the competitive family dynamics that had previously shaped our relationship. Dr. Walsh and Mr. Hamilton talked about you the way people talk about Sandra Mitchell, she said slowly, like you're someone whose professional opinion carries weight in important decisions. That's because I am, I said without defensiveness or pride. The difference is that my work doesn't generate press releases or social media content. Success in cybersecurity means preventing disasters that never become news stories. Victoria leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as if the country club's ornate moldings might provide clarity about how to process this new version of family hierarchy. I've been giving you career advice, she said with what sounded like dawning horror. I've been telling people you need guidance about professional development. I know. I told Sandra Mitchell that you were an example of someone who prioritizes creative freedom over financial responsibility. I heard. Victoria covered her face with her hands, a gesture I'd never seen from someone who had built her entire identity around confident competence. Oh, God, the dinner parties. All those conversations about different personality types and career motivation. Those were particularly creative, I acknowledged. When she looked up, her eyes were red in a way that suggested genuine emotional processing rather than social embarrassment. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she said. I genuinely thought I was being helpful. I thought you were struggling and didn't know how to ask for support. I know that too. Victoria wiped her eyes carefully, trying to preserve her makeup while dealing with what appeared to be the most psychologically challenging conversation of her adult life. What I don't understand is why you didn't correct me. If someone was giving me wrong information about their life for 5 years, I'd want them to stop me. This was the question I'd been anticipating and dreading in equal measure. Because correcting you would have required explaining work that I couldn't discuss publicly to someone who was already convinced she understood my situation better than I did. Because your assumptions served my professional interests by keeping me invisible. And because... I paused, choosing words carefully. Because I was curious to see how far you'd take it.
The last admission created another long silence as Victoria processed the possibility that my strategic silence had been partially motivated by something resembling scientific interest in her psychological patterns. "You were studying me," she said, with a mixture of hurt and what might have been grudging admiration. Like I was some kind of social experiment? Not studying, I clarified, but observing. Watching how someone builds a narrative about another person's life and then defends that narrative against evidence that doesn't support it. Victoria nodded slowly, as if this explanation made uncomfortable sense within her understanding of human psychology. And tonight was when the evidence became impossible to ignore. Tonight was when the two worlds I'd kept separate collided in a way that made continued separation impossible. She glanced around the ballroom, taking in the corporate sponsor displays and networking clusters that represented the business ecosystem where both our professional identities coexisted without her previous awareness. "Half the companies here probably use your services," Victoria said, her voice carrying new understanding of interconnections she'd never recognized.
More than half, I confirmed, including some of the clients you've been trying to cultivate for real estate opportunities. This revelation prompted another wave of cognitive recalibration as Victoria realized that her professional networking efforts had been taking place within a business community where my reputation and capabilities were already established and respected. "I feel like I've been living in a parallel universe," she said, quietly, "where success looked completely different from what was actually happening." "That's not entirely wrong," I said. "We've been operating in parallel professional universes that occasionally intersect without either of us recognizing the connections." Victoria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the country club's grounds while processing the conversation. When she turned back, her expression had shifted into something that resembled the analytical mode she used for complex real estate negotiations. "What happens now?" she asked. "Do we pretend this conversation never happened? Do we tell our parents that their understanding of both our careers has been completely wrong? Do we start over with different assumptions about each other? What do you want to happen?" I asked, genuinely curious about her preference for managing the aftermath of such a fundamental shift in family dynamics. Victoria considered the question with visible seriousness. She said, "I want to understand what I missed. I want to know how someone builds the kind of professional reputation that makes bank executives and hospital administrators light up when they see you at social events. And I want to figure out how to have a relationship with my sister that's based on who we actually are instead of who I thought we were." Her response suggested that the competitive dynamics that had previously characterized our relationship might be evolving into something more collaborative and mutually respectful. "Those are reasonable goals," I said, "but they'll require you to accept that some aspects of my work will always remain confidential, and that traditional measures of professional success don't always apply to specialized industries." Victoria nodded. "I'm beginning to understand that there are entire sectors of business activity that I knew nothing about, despite thinking I had a comprehensive view of how professional success works in this region." The evening's final irony occurred during our parents' ride home to Pinewood Valley, when they called to share their pride in Victoria's award and to mention how impressed they'd been with the caliber of business leaders who attended the gala. "Such accomplished people," our mother had said during the speakerphone conversation, and everyone was so respectful and interested when we mentioned that Victoria's sister works in technology. Several people said that cybersecurity is becoming increasingly important for business operations. Victoria and I exchanged a glance that carried years of misunderstanding, months of strategic silence, and the beginning of what might become mutual recognition based on actual, rather than imagined, professional identities. "Yes," Victoria had replied to our mother, "cybersecurity is definitely important. More important than most people realize." 6 months later, Victoria began referring clients who needed digital security assessments to Quantum Shield, creating a professional collaboration that benefited both our businesses while maintaining appropriate boundaries around confidential information. Our family dinners became more balanced conversations where both our professional achievements received recognition, and Victoria's networking events occasionally included discussions of cybersecurity trends that reflected her new understanding of technology's role in business operations. The transformation wasn't dramatic or emotionally cathartic. It was quiet, practical, and based on mutual recognition of competence rather than defensive explanations of misunderstandings. Sometimes the most profound changes happen not through confrontation or dramatic revelation, but through patient demonstration of capabilities that speak louder than any argument about worth or achievement. Victoria learned that success takes many forms, some of which operate invisibly until circumstances make them undeniable. I learned that strategic silence, while professionally valuable, carries emotional costs that eventually require honest conversation to resolve. The evening that was supposed to celebrate Victoria's recognition as a rising business leader
ended up marking the beginning of our recognition of each other as professionals whose different approaches to career building had both led to meaningful achievements. That recognition, delivered through third-party validation rather than family argument, created the foundation for a relationship based on respect rather than condescension, and understanding rather than assumptions about each other's capabilities and choices. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.